A blind war veteran stepped into a remote K-9 training facility, hoping to find a dog who could guide him and maybe keep the silence away. What he didn't expect was to stop cold in front of a kennel everyone else avoided. Inside was a retired K-9 labeled too dangerous, too unstable, never to be adopted. A dog broken by war, just like him. But the moment the veteran paused, the dog did something no one had seen before. The growling stopped. The pacing slowed. And in the middle of a place built on fear and steel, something unseen recognized something familiar. What happened next, during a disaster no one could have predicted, would change both of their lives forever. Before we begin, take a second to like and subscribe. And tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The morning air over Red Canyon, Colorado was thin and sharp, carrying the faint scent of pine and cold stone. A gray sky stretched low above the city, heavy with the promise of snow that hadn't yet fallen. The wind moved quietly through the narrow streets, brushing against brick walls and parked cars, as if even the town itself was holding its breath. Daniel Brooks stepped out of the rideshare vehicle and stood still. He didn't look around. He couldn't. Instead, he listened. The distant hum of traffic, a flag snapping against a metal pole, the crunch of gravel beneath his boots as he shifted his weight. His right hand tightened around a white mobility cane, worn smooth from years of use. His left hovered uncertainly in front of him, searching for space, for distance, for something solid to trust. Daniel Brooks was 36 years old. He stood just over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, his posture still carrying the discipline of a Marine, despite the darkness that had claimed his sight. His hair was cropped short, dark with threads of gray that had arrived far earlier than they should have. A thin scar ran from his left temple toward his cheekbone, disappearing beneath the shadow of a neatly kept beard. His eyes were open, clear, and unfocused. Blind. Completely. 3 years earlier, an explosion in Afghanistan had stolen his vision, his squad, and the future he thought he understood. What it hadn't taken was the war itself. That followed him home, into his sleep, into the quiet moments, into the silence where light used to be. He adjusted the strap of the worn duffel bag slung across his shoulder and faced forward. Somewhere in front of him stood the Red Canyon K-9 facility. Daniel took a slow breath. "I can do this," he murmured, not for confidence, but for grounding. The cane tapped once, then again, echoing softly as he moved toward the entrance. The lobby smelled like disinfectant, metal, and something faintly animal. Not unpleasant, just honest. Daniel paused just inside the doorway, letting his senses map the room. High ceiling, open space, hard floors. The faint sound of barking, distant but present, layered with the rhythmic clink of steel doors. This was not a place of comfort. It was a place of discipline. A woman approached, her footsteps light but purposeful. "Mr. Brooks?" Her voice was young, cautious, polite in the way people often are when they don't know how to act around someone broken in ways they can't see. "Yes," Daniel replied. "Daniel is fine." "Right. Daniel. I'm Emma." Emma Caldwell was 24, though her voice carried the careful restraint of someone who felt younger in responsibility than in years. She stood about 5'6", slim, with a straight-backed posture that suggested she was still learning how to command authority. Her brown hair was pulled into a practical ponytail, and she wore the standard center uniform khaki pants, boots, and a navy jacket with the facility's logo stitched on the chest. Emma had joined Red Canyon straight out of college. She loved dogs, believed in training, believed in rules. What she didn't yet believe in was exceptions, especially not ones that could get people hurt. "I'll be assisting today," she continued. "Our coordinator is finishing another evaluation, but I can show you the service-ready candidates." Daniel nodded. "That would be great." Emma hesitated, just long enough for him to hear it in the silence. She cleared her throat. "Before we begin, I should mention, we don't usually place K-9s with first-time handlers who are fully blind, not without extensive preparation." Daniel smiled faintly. "I'm not here for usual, or..." Emma blinked, caught off guard. "I see." He didn't correct her. As they walked deeper into the facility, the barking grew louder, some playful, some sharp, some restless. Daniel tilted his head slightly, listening the way others might read faces. Excitement, anxiety, loneliness. Dogs, he had learned, never lied with sound. I've reviewed your file, Emma said as they moved. Marine Corps, honorably discharged, medically retired. Yes. You live alone? Yes. No family nearby? Daniel's grip tightened briefly on the cane. No. Emma nodded, making a mental note she would later regret. They passed several kennels. Daniel could feel eyes on him, curious, alert, hopeful. Then it happened. A sound tore through the corridor. Not a bark, a growl, low, deep, violent. It vibrated through the concrete floor and slammed into Daniel's chest like a memory he hadn't invited. Emma stopped short. That one? She said quickly. We're not going that way. Daniel had already frozen. The growl came again, followed by the explosive clang of metal rattling under force. Who is that? Daniel asked quietly. Emma swallowed. That's Ranger. The name hung in the air, heavy. Ranger is a retired K9, she continued. German Shepherd, male, about 9 years old, former military and police joint task force. Daniel turned slightly toward the sound. And he's not adoptable, Emma said firmly. Behavioral instability, aggression, he's kept in isolation. Another growl echoed, closer now, stronger. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. That doesn't sound like anger, he said. Emma frowned. With respect, sir, it absolutely is. But Daniel shook his head slowly. No, that's pain. Emma didn't answer. She guided him forward, away from the sound, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something behind those bars was listening just as closely as he was. That night, back in the small motel room a few blocks away, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, recorder in hand. His voice journal, a habit he'd formed after the nightmares started. Log entry, he said softly. Day 1, Red Canyon. He paused, searching for words. I heard a dog today, he continued. They say he's dangerous, broken, unmanageable. Daniel swallowed. He sounded like me. He clicked the recorder off. Sleep came in fragments. Fire, sand, pressure, darkness. Back at the facility the next morning, Emma walked past the isolated wing and stopped. Ranger's kennel stood at the far end, marked with red warning signs, steel-reinforced bars, and a distance no one crossed unless necessary. Inside, Ranger lay still. A massive German Shepherd with a scarred muzzle, dark amber eyes, and a body built from years of discipline and combat. His black and tan coat was thick but dull, marked with patches where fur never fully grew back. One ear bore a slight tear and old injury, never repaired. At the sound of footsteps, his head lifted. He listened. And for the first time in a long while, he did not growl. The next morning at Red Canyon K9 facility arrived quietly, wrapped in a brittle cold that pressed against the concrete walls and lingered in the corridors. Daniel Brooks returned with the same steady steps, his cane tapping a careful rhythm that echoed faintly through the building. He had slept poorly. Not because of the place, but because of a sound he couldn't forget, a growl that wasn't anger, a growl that carried weight, memory, and something broken underneath. Emma Caldwell met him near the front desk. She looked more tired than the day before, dark circles faintly visible beneath her eyes. Her uniform was crisp, but her shoulders were tense, as if she had carried an argument all night and never set it down. "Good morning, Daniel," she said, her voice polite but guarded. "Morning," he replied. "I hope I'm not early." "You're not." She hesitated, then added, "We'll stick to the service-ready wing today." Daniel nodded, though he knew exactly what she was trying to avoid. They walked past the kennels again. The chorus of dogs rose and fell as they moved, some barking eagerly, others whining softly. Daniel listened, sorting the sounds the way a musician might recognize instruments in an orchestra, but his attention kept drifting down the corridor, toward the isolated wing. And then he heard it again. A low, rumbling growl rolled through the air, vibrating against the steel and concrete. It was deeper today, slower, as if the dog behind it had spent the night pacing with memories instead of sleep. Daniel stopped. Emma felt it instantly. "Daniel." "That's him," Daniel said quietly. "Ranger." Emma exhaled through her nose. "Yes, and we are not stopping." But Daniel didn't move. He angled his body slightly toward the sound, his head tilted, his expression unreadable. "He's not raging," Daniel said. "He's warning the world not to come closer." "That's aggression," Emma replied, a little sharper than she meant to. And it's exactly why he's isolated. Daniel smiled faintly, a sad curve of the mouth. That's exactly why soldiers isolate themselves too. Emma opened her mouth, then closed it again. Behind them, footsteps approached. Heavy, deliberate. Everything all right here? The voice belonged to Mark Holloway, the senior handler on duty. Mark was in his early 40s, tall and broad, with a thick neck and hands permanently roughened by years of working dogs that outweighed him. His hair was cut short and already thinning, and a faded scar crossed one eyebrow. He had the calm authority of someone who had broken up fights human and canine and learned when to speak softly and when not to. Emma turned toward him with visible relief. "Mark, we're heading to the service wing." Mark's gaze shifted to Daniel, then down the corridor. "You heard Ranger," he said, not as a question. "Yes," Daniel replied. Mark studied him for a moment. "Most people here fear when he growls." "And you?" Daniel asked. Mark's jaw tightened. "I hear a dog who lost his anchor." Silence settled between them. "Tell me about him," Daniel said. Emma stiffened. "We're not authorized." "It's fine," Mark interrupted gently. "He deserves to know." They stopped just short of the isolated wing. The air felt heavier here, colder, as if the walls remembered things they refused to forget. "Ranger is 9, Mark began. "German Shepherd, military trained, then transferred to a joint task force with local police. Explosives detection, perimeter security, extraction cover." Daniel listened closely. "He worked with Sergeant Lucas Hale," Mark continued. 6 years. They were inseparable." At the sound of the name, Ranger's growl shifted. It softened for half a second, then returned, rougher, edged with something raw. Daniel's chest tightened. 2 years ago," Mark said. "They were ambushed during a convoy operation. Hale was killed instantly." Emma swallowed hard. "Ranger dragged 2 wounded soldiers to cover before anyone could pull him away." Daniel lowered his head slightly. "And after?" he asked. "After," Mark said quietly. "He refused to leave Hale's body, snapped at anyone who tried, took 3 handlers and a tranquilizer to move him." The corridor felt very still. "Since then," Emma added, "he hasn't allowed anyone within 10 feet. He's attacked twice, nearly broke a man's arm." Daniel's grip tightened around his cane. "He did his job," Daniel said. "And then he lost everything." Mark nodded. "That's one way to put it." From inside the kennel, Ranger let out a sharp bark, then went silent. Daniel took one careful step forward. Emma reached for his arm. "Please don't." "I'm not crossing the barrier," Daniel said. "I just want him to hear me." Mark hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Daniel stopped several feet away from the reinforced gate. He stood still, breathing evenly, letting the silence stretch. "I lost my squad in one blast," he said calmly, his voice carrying down the corridor. "Lost my eyes in the same moment. Woke up in darkness with no one calling my name." Ranger's breathing changed, slower, heavier. Daniel continued. "People told me I was dangerous to myself after that. Unstable, a liability." Emma felt her throat tighten. "I wasn't," Daniel said. "I was grieving." A low sound escaped Ranger, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, something uncertain. Mark's eyes widened slightly. He had never heard that sound from Ranger before. Daniel didn't move. He didn't reach out. He simply stood there, open, unguarded. "I'm not here to fix you," Daniel said softly. "I'm just here to listen." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Ranger stopped pacing. The silence was absolute. Emma's breath caught. He's not reacting." Mark frowned. "He should be." Inside the kennel, Ranger stood still, massive frame rigid, ears angled forward. His amber eyes were locked on the shape of the man he couldn't see but somehow understood. A tremor ran through his body, then stilled. Daniel exhaled slowly. "That," he said, barely above a whisper, "is not a monster." Behind them, a door opened, voices spilling into the hall. 2 staff members argued in hushed tones about Ranger's future, about risk reports and euthanasia recommendations. Emma turned sharply, her face pale. "Enough," she snapped, surprising even herself. The voices fell silent. Daniel didn't hear the words, but he heard the weight behind them. "They want to put him down," he said. Mark didn't deny it. Daniel nodded once, a decision forming quietly, firmly in his chest. "Not yet," he said. "He's not done." Inside the kennel, Ranger lowered himself to the floor, still watching, still listening. For the first time in a very long while, he did not feel alone. The temperature inside Red Canyon K9 facility felt different that afternoon. Not colder, not warmer, but heavier, as if the air itself had absorbed the tension left behind from the morning. Daniel Brooks stood near the isolated wing again, his cane resting lightly against the concrete floor, his posture calm but resolute. He had not planned to return so soon, but sleep had abandoned him once more, replaced by the memory of a sound that refused to fade. Ranger's silence had spoken louder than any growl. Emma Caldwell walked beside him, her steps slower than usual. She no longer rushed to guide him away from the reinforced corridor. Her shoulders were still stiff, but something in her expression had softened, as though the certainty she once clung to had begun to crack. Emma was still the same young woman, slim, practical, hair pulled back tight, voice trained to stay professional, but the sharp edge of doubt had replaced her earlier confidence. Watching Daniel had done that to her. Watching Ranger had done even more. "You're asking for supervised contact," Emma said carefully. "That's not something we usually allow." Daniel nodded. "I know." They stopped several yards from Ranger's kennel. The steel bars loomed ahead, reinforced and marked with red warning signs that had been bolted there after too many close calls. Inside, Ranger was awake. He sat instead of paced now, his large frame folded neatly onto the concrete, tail curled close to his body. His coat caught the overhead light in dull streaks of black and tan, scars faintly visible along his muzzle and flank. At 9 years old, he still carried the strength of a working dog, but there was a weariness in the way he held himself, as if his body remembered commands his heart no longer wanted to obey. Mark Holloway stood nearby, arms crossed, watching both man and dog with measured caution. His presence was solid, grounding, the kind of man who believed in procedure but understood that rules sometimes bent before truth. He said nothing, waiting. "I'm not asking to go inside," Daniel said. "Not yet. I just want permission to stand closer, for him to smell me." Emma hesitated. She glanced at Mark, who met her eyes briefly before giving a slow nod. "We'll keep the safety barrier in place," Mark said, "and I don't take my eyes off either of you." "That's fair," Daniel replied. Emma swallowed. "All right. But the moment he shows signs of escalation, we pull back." Daniel took one step forward, then another. He stopped just short of the barrier, close enough that he could feel the subtle vibration of Ranger's movement through the floor. He stood still, shoulders relaxed, hands open at his sides. No sudden motions, no challenge. Ranger lifted his head. For a heartbeat, the tension sharpened. His ears twitched, nostrils flaring as he drew in the unfamiliar scent drifting toward him. Metal, smoke, old fabric. And beneath it all, something deeper gun oil, sand, blood long washed but never forgotten. The smell of war. A low sound rose in his chest. Emma tensed. But it wasn't a growl. It was a whine, soft, broken, confused. Ranger shifted forward, inch by inch, until his chest pressed lightly against the bars. His breathing grew uneven, and his amber eyes never left Daniel's face. He didn't bark. He didn't snarl. He simply leaned there, as if the steel were the only thing keeping him upright. Daniel felt it immediately. "He smells it," Daniel said quietly. "Smells what?" Emma asked, barely above a whisper. "The same thing he carries," Daniel replied. "Loss." Ranger let out another small sound, almost imperceptible, and lowered his head slightly. His body trembled, not with aggression, but with restraint. Mark's brow furrowed. "I've never seen him do that." Emma shook her head slowly. "Neither has anyone else." Daniel didn't move closer. Instead, he spoke. "I wasn't always blind," he said, his voice steady, measured. "I used to see everything. Faces, terrain, threats before they moved." Ranger's ears angled forward. "I was point man," Daniel continued. "Then there was a flash, heat, pressure, and silence." He paused, swallowing. "When I woke up, they told me my eyes were gone, but that wasn't the worst part." He breathed in slowly. The worst part was realizing no one needed me anymore. The corridor felt impossibly quiet. "They sent me home," Daniel said. "Everyone else stayed behind, or didn't make it back at all. I survived, and I didn't know what to do with that." Ranger sank down into a sit, still pressed close to the bars, his head lowered until his chin nearly touched the floor, a submissive posture that startled both handlers. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel tilted his head, listening closely to Ranger's breathing. "That's what they mean when they say untrainable, isn't it?" he asked gently. "He doesn't respond to commands anymore, only to truth." Ranger inched closer again, his nose brushing the cold metal. He inhaled deeply, then again, focusing on Daniel's jacket, the worn fabric carrying echoes of another life. Another battlefield. Emma felt something shift inside her chest. "He's recognizing you," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "Not me. What I carry." He raised one hand slowly, stopping inches from the barrier, palm open. He didn't reach for Ranger. He let Ranger decide. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Ranger leaned forward, pressing his muzzle against the bars where Daniel's hand hovered just beyond reach. His body shook, and a quiet, aching sound escaped him, neither warning nor fear, but something far more vulnerable. Emma's eyes burned. Daniel lowered his hand, resting it against the steel. "You weren't abandoned," he said softly. "You were left behind." Ranger closed his eyes. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened. Voices followed administrative staff passing by, unaware of what was unfolding. Emma straightened instinctively, stepping slightly in front of Daniel, her body language subtle but deliberate. For the first time since she'd started working at Red Canyon, she wasn't enforcing distance. She was guarding it. Mark noticed. He said nothing. Daniel kept his hand against the bars, feeling the warmth of Ranger's breath through the metal. "I know what it's like," he continued. "To sit in the dark and wonder if the world forgot you." Ranger's tail shifted once, slow and uncertain. "That doesn't mean you're done," Daniel said. "It just means no one taught you how to come back." When Daniel finally stepped away, Ranger didn't explode into noise or rage. He stayed where he was, watching, listening, as if committing the shape of this moment to memory. Emma exhaled shakily. "We should end the session," she said, "before someone notices." Daniel nodded. "Thank you." As they walked back down the corridor, Emma glanced over her shoulder. Ranger remained seated at the bars, calm, unmoving, his eyes following Daniel until the sound of the cane faded. Emma realized, with a quiet certainty that frightened her, that whatever Ranger was, he was no longer unreachable. And Daniel Brooks was no longer alone. The first tremor hit just after noon. It wasn't violent at first, just a low, rolling vibration that traveled through the concrete floors of Red Canyon K9 facility like a distant train passing underground. Daniel Brooks felt it through the soles of his boots before anyone spoke. His cane rattled faintly against the floor, and the air shifted, thickened, as if the building itself had drawn a sudden, startled breath. "What was that?" Daniel asked. Emma Caldwell froze beside him, her head snapped up, eyes scanning the ceiling out of reflex. "That felt like—" The second tremor answered for her. This one was sharper. Lights flickered overhead. Somewhere down the corridor, a metal door slammed shut with a hollow clang. Dogs began barking all at once, high, frantic sounds layered with panic. "Earthquake!" Mark Holloway shouted from further down the hall. His calm voice carried authority, but even he couldn't mask the urgency underneath. "Everyone initiate evacuation protocol now." The floor lurched. Daniel staggered as Emma grabbed his arm, anchoring him. Dust drifted from the ceiling, dry and choking. Somewhere nearby, glass shattered. "We need to get out," Emma said, her voice tight but controlled. She had gone pale, but her grip was firm. "Daniel, stay with me." They moved quickly toward the main corridor, but another violent jolt rocked the building sideways. A deep, grinding sound followed, concrete straining against steel. Then came the alarm. A shrill, piercing wail tore through the facility, accompanied by flashing red lights that Daniel could not see but felt in the sudden urgency of everyone's movement. "Fire in the west wing," someone yelled. "Electrical failure sprinklers offline." The smell hit moments later. Smoke, acrid and sharp. Daniel's heart pounded, not with fear but with focus. His world narrowed to sound and motion. Boots pounding, dogs howling, commands shouted over chaos. Then he heard it, a sound that cut through everything else. Steel slamming against steel. A deep, desperate bark, raw and uncontrolled. Ranger. Daniel stopped dead. Ranger's still in isolation, he said. Emma hesitated for half a second too long. The West Wing is compromised, she said. We have to clear this section. Ranger's kennel is in that wing, Daniel said quietly. Another tremor hit, stronger than the last. The lights went out completely this time, plunging the corridor into darkness that felt heavier than Daniel's blindness, because now everyone else shared it. Emergency lights kicked in weakly, casting a dim, red glow. Smoke thickened, curling low along the ceiling. Mark's voice cut through the noise. All personnel evacuate. Leave the dogs. We'll come back with fire teams. Daniel turned toward the sound of Ranger's barking. It was louder now, frenzied, not aggressive, terrified. Daniel, Emma said urgently, pulling at his arm. We have to go. Not without him, Daniel replied. The words surprised even him with their certainty. Emma shook her head. The lock's Daniel. The isolation wing uses electronic fail-safes. If the system's down, we can't open his kennel. As if to confirm it, a loud mechanical buzz echoed, then died. The remote locks are offline, someone shouted. Ranger's barking escalated into something broken, punctuated by the sound of his body slamming against the reinforced bars. The metal groaned under the force. He thinks we're leaving him, Daniel said. Emma's throat tightened. We don't have a choice. Yes, Daniel said softly. We do. Another jolt threw them sideways. A beam collapsed somewhere nearby with a thunderous crash, followed by screams and scrambling footsteps. Daniel, Mark shouted. You need to move, now. Daniel didn't. He turned fully toward Ranger's wing. I know that sound, he said. That's not violence. That's fear. Emma felt her grip loosen. She stared at him, seeing something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not recklessness, but resolve forged by something older than training manuals or safety protocols. You can't see, she said, her voice cracking despite herself. You'll get lost. Daniel nodded once. He won't. Another explosion echoed through the building as fire found something flammable. Heat rolled through the corridor in waves. We're out of time, Mark said, torn between duty and disbelief. Daniel reached down, unclipped the loop of his cane from his wrist, and handed it to Emma. Her eyes widened. What are you doing? Trusting him, Daniel said. Before anyone could stop him, he stepped away from the evacuation route and into the smoke-filled corridor leading toward isolation. Daniel! Emma shouted. He didn't turn back. The smoke thickened instantly, burning his lungs, stealing his breath. He moved forward slowly, one hand skimming the wall, counting steps the way he had learned to do after the war. The alarm screamed overhead. Somewhere behind him, Emma cried out his name again, but her voice faded beneath the chaos. Ranger! Daniel called hoarsely. A bark answered, closer now, guiding. The isolation wing was a nightmare of sound and heat. Sprinklers had failed, leaving the air dry and choking. Ranger's kennel rattled violently as the dog hurled himself against the bars, barking in panic, claws scraping uselessly against the concrete floor. Smoke poured into the kennel, curling around Ranger's massive frame. His eyes were wild, ears pinned back, chest heaving. He wasn't attacking the cage. He was trying to escape it. Ranger! Daniel called again, coughing hard. I'm here! The barking stopped for half a heartbeat. Then it changed. Shorter, sharper, focused. Ranger slammed into the door once more, harder than before, driven by something beyond fear now. Daniel reached the kennel, his hand finding the edge of the metal frame, already hot to the touch. He pulled back with a sharp gasp. The lock was electronic. Dead. Hold on, Daniel rasped. I won't leave you. Behind him, flames roared closer. A section of ceiling collapsed, sending sparks cascading across the floor. Heat pressed in from all sides. Ranger whined, a sound of pure desperation, and threw his weight forward again. The bars bowed slightly under the impact. Daniel wrapped his jacket around his hand and grabbed the manual release lever beneath the control panel. He pulled. Nothing. Smoke filled his lungs. His vision, already dark, felt like it was closing in even further. Again, he whispered. Ranger obeyed. The dog hurled himself forward with everything he had left. The weakened locking mechanism shrieked, then snapped with a metallic crack. The kennel door burst open. Ranger exploded out of the smoke, not toward Daniel's throat, but around him. He circled frantically, nudging Daniel's chest, whining loudly, confirming his presence, his reality. "You found me," Daniel coughed, gripping Ranger's thick fur. "Good boy." A beam collapsed behind them, cutting off the corridor they'd come from. Fire surged upward, devouring the ceiling. Ranger barked once sharp, commanding, and pressed his body against Daniel's side. He turned. Daniel followed. Step by step, Ranger guided him through the burning wing, using his body to steer, to block falling debris, to brace Daniel when the floor shifted beneath them. When Daniel stumbled, Ranger absorbed the weight. When smoke thickened, Ranger pushed forward, unyielding. They burst through the emergency exit moments before flames swallowed the hallway behind them. Cold air hit Daniel's face like a miracle. Hands grabbed him, voices shouted, sirens wailed. Daniel collapsed to his knees, coughing violently. Ranger stayed pressed against him, trembling, soot-streaked, exhausted but unbroken. Emma reached them seconds later, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on her face. "You're alive," she sobbed. Daniel rested one shaking hand on Ranger's neck. So was he. The smoke did not lift when they reached the exterior. It followed them, rolling out of the shattered wing of Red Canyon K9 facility like a living thing, thick and choking, carrying the smell of burned insulation and scorched steel. Sirens wailed somewhere beyond the fence line. Boots pounded against gravel. Voices shouted orders. Daniel Brooks could barely separate from the ringing in his ears. He was on his knees, coughing hard, one hand pressed to the ground, the other buried deep in Ranger's fur. Ranger stood over him, massive body angled protectively, ribs heaving as he drew in air that burned his lungs. Ash clung to his coat, turning the black and tan into streaks of gray. His ears were pinned back, tail low, muscles still taut, not with aggression, but with vigilance. Even now, even outside the burning structure, Ranger was braced for the world to try to take something from him again. "I'm okay," Daniel rasped, though his chest felt like it had been scraped raw. He ran his fingers along Ranger's neck, grounding himself in the warmth and solidity of the dog. "You did good. You did so good." Ranger responded by nudging Daniel's shoulder with his nose, a firm, insistent motion, as if checking that the man was still real. His breathing slowed only slightly. A pair of hands reached for Daniel from behind. "Sir, we need to get you checked," a voice said. It belonged to Tom Alvarez, a firefighter paramedic in his early 30s, compact and wiry, with soot smeared across his face and dark curls plastered to his forehead with sweat. His eyes were sharp, trained, but uncertain now as he took in the sight before him. The moment Tom stepped closer, Ranger's head snapped up. A low, warning growl rolled from his chest, not loud, not explosive, but unmistakable. Ranger shifted his body, placing himself squarely between Daniel and the approaching hands. Tom froze. "It's okay," Daniel said quickly, lifting his head toward the sound. "He's protecting me." The growl softened, though Ranger did not move aside. Tom raised his hand slowly. "That's the K9 from the isolation wing," he said, glancing toward the burning building. "The dangerous one." Daniel let out a hoarse, almost humorless breath. "He just saved my life." Ranger's tail flicked once, uncertain but present. Emma Caldwell pushed through the cluster of responders then, her face streaked with soot and tears. Her jacket hung open, one sleeve torn, and her hands trembled as she knelt beside Daniel. "I thought," her voice broke. She swallowed hard and tried again. "I thought we lost you." Daniel turned his head toward her. "You didn't." Emma looked at Ranger, really looked at him this time. Not as a liability, not as a case file, but as a living being whose body still shook from the effort of what he had just done. "He guided you out," she whispered. "Yes," Daniel said simply. "He was my eyes." Behind them, more firefighters arrived. One of them, Sarah Whitman, stood a few steps back, watching. Sarah was in her late 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, her graying hair cut short for practicality rather than style. Years ago, she had lost her younger brother in a warehouse fire. It had carved something permanent into her face, a gravity that never fully left. She crossed her arms now, studying Ranger with a mixture of disbelief and quiet respect. "I've seen trained service dogs do impressive things," Sarah said to no one in particular, "but I've never seen anything like that." Daniel began to push himself upright, instinctively reaching for his cane. It wasn't there. For a split second, panic flared in his chest. Ranger felt it immediately. Before Daniel could ask, Ranger stepped closer, pressing his shoulder firmly against Daniel's leg, steadying him. He shifted his weight, offering support the way he had inside the fire. Daniel's hand fell naturally to Ranger's back. "That's all right," Daniel murmured. "I don't need it right now." Emma's eyes widened. "Daniel." "It's okay," he repeated. "I trust him." And he did. Completely. Ranger guided him a step forward, then another, adjusting his pace to Daniel's unsteady breathing. When debris crunched underfoot, Ranger slowed. When Daniel drifted too close to a tangle of hoses, Ranger nudged him gently back on course. The firefighters stopped what they were doing. They watched. Tom shook his head in disbelief. He's actively guiding him. Sarah let out a slow breath. Not trained, choosing. As they moved farther from the burning wing, a section of the roof collapsed inward with a deafening roar. Flames surged skyward, heat washing over the group. Ranger stiffened, body lowering instinctively, and shifted closer to Daniel, placing himself between the man and the danger. Ash rained down, and Ranger took the brunt of it, head lowered, back arched protectively. Daniel felt the impact of falling debris strike Ranger's flank. "Ranger!" he said sharply, fear threading his voice. Ranger didn't move away. He absorbed it. Emma covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. "He's shielding him." Daniel's fingers tightened in Ranger's fur. "You don't have to," he whispered. Ranger let out a soft, breathy sound something between a huff and a whine, and stayed exactly where he was. They reached the staging area, where ambulances waited with doors open and lights flashing. Medics rushed forward again, more cautiously this time. Tom knelt beside Daniel. "Sir, you're in shock. Smoke inhalation. We need to get you oxygen." Ranger growled again, lower this time, a tremor running through his chest. "It's okay," Daniel said, his voice firm despite his shaking hands. "He's here to help." Tom nodded slowly. "All right, I'll work around him." As the oxygen mask was placed over Daniel's face, Ranger hovered close, nose pressed near Daniel's shoulder, breathing in sync with him as if reminding himself that Daniel was still there. Emma watched, stunned. She had spent months filing reports on Ranger, reading about incidents, memorizing warnings, and yet none of those pages had prepared her for this quiet, absolute devotion. "He didn't just guide him," she said softly to Sarah. "He chose him." Sarah nodded. "Looks like it." Daniel sat back against the ambulance bumper, the oxygen easing the tightness in his chest. Ranger settled beside him, finally allowing his body to sag with exhaustion. His legs trembled, but he stayed upright, leaning into Daniel's side. Daniel rested his hand on Ranger's head. "Hey," he murmured, "you did your job." Ranger closed his eyes. Around them, the chaos continued, firefighters shouting, water spraying, radios crackling. But for a moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was this: a blind man sitting in the aftermath of destruction, alive because a dog once deemed dangerous had refused to leave him behind. Emma stepped closer, her voice barely steady. "Daniel, when this is over, they're going to have questions." Daniel nodded. "I know." Ranger shifted, pressing his head against Daniel's chest, as if sensing the uncertainty ahead. Daniel wrapped his arm around him without hesitation. "We'll face it together," he said. Ranger stayed. The weeks that followed the collapse of Red Canyon K-9 facility unfolded slowly, like a wound learning how to close. Temporary fencing surrounded the damaged wing, and the air still carried the faint smell of smoke and wet ash long after the flames had been extinguished. Paperwork replaced sirens. Meetings replaced chaos. And in a quiet office with cracked windows and humming fluorescent lights, Ranger's file sat open on a desk for the first time in years. The word "dangerous" was printed across the top in red. It didn't stay there. Director Henry Whitaker, a man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and a permanent crease between his brows, stared down at the pages in silence. Whitaker had built his career on caution. Tall, lean, always impeccably dressed, he believed in procedure the way some people believed in faith. Years earlier, a lawsuit involving a failed K-9 placement had cost the center millions and nearly ended his career. Since then, he trusted reports more than instincts. But reports couldn't explain what dozens of witnesses had seen: firefighters, paramedics, handlers, staff, all describing the same thing: a blind man walking through smoke and fire, guided step by step by a dog deemed unmanageable. Whitaker closed the file and exhaled slowly. Across from him sat Emma Caldwell, posture straight but hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked different now, still young, still professional, but steadier. The uncertainty that once defined her had been replaced by something earned. "We can't ignore this," Emma said quietly. "Ranger didn't just behave well under stress. he chose to protect. Whitaker rubbed his temples. One incident doesn't erase years of documented aggression. Emma met his gaze. It wasn't one incident, it was a bond. A knock interrupted them. "Come in," Whitaker said. Daniel Brooks entered slowly, Ranger at his side, no leash. Ranger walked close, his shoulder aligned perfectly with Daniel's leg, matching his pace without command or cue. His coat had been cleaned, though faint scorch marks still darkened the fur along his flank. His eyes were calm now, alert but no longer haunted by the constant expectation of loss. Daniel had changed too. His movements were more assured. He no longer reached out blindly for walls or doorframes. His hand rested lightly on Ranger's harness, not as a tool, but as a point of connection. They stopped in the center of the room. Whitaker stood, surprised despite himself. Daniel spoke first. "I know why you called me." Whitaker nodded. "This decision affects more than just you." Daniel smiled faintly. "So did the fire." Silence settled. Whitaker cleared his throat. "Ranger saved your life." "And I saved his," Daniel replied. "We're even." Ranger sat calmly at Daniel's side, tail resting on the floor, ears relaxed. Whitaker looked at the dog again, not as a liability, as a veteran. "I've reviewed every statement," Whitaker said, "including those recommending euthanasia." Emma stiffened. "And I've reviewed every counter-report," he continued, "the ones filed after the incident." He reached for a pen. "With immediate effect," Whitaker said slowly, "Ranger's classification is changed, behavioral restrictions lifted, adoption eligibility approved under special placement." Emma let out a sharp breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Daniel's shoulders sagged, relief washing through him. Ranger leaned into Daniel's leg, sensing the shift. Whitaker extended his hand. "Mr. Brooks, if you're willing." Daniel shook it firmly. "I am." Daniel's apartment overlooked a small park on the east side of the city. It wasn't large. One bedroom. Sunlight Daniel couldn't see, but felt through the warmth on his skin each morning. The floors creaked softly underfoot, and the walls bore the quiet echoes of someone who had lived alone for too long. Ranger explored cautiously at first. He moved from room to room, nose low, cataloging scents, checking corners, ensuring the space was secure. When he finished, he returned to Daniel and lay down at his feet, exhaling deeply. Home. The training didn't begin with commands. It began with trust. Daniel learned Ranger's movements the way one learns a language by listening, by feeling the shift of weight, the change in breath. Ranger learned Daniel's pace, his hesitations, the subtle tension that meant danger was near. They practiced in the hallway first, then the sidewalk, then the park. Emma joined them often, her role evolving naturally. She wore her hair looser now, her voice warmer, less guarded. What she lacked in experience, she made up for in patience. Together, they documented progress, developing a specialized guide program for veterans with combat-related trauma. They called it Second Watch. Ranger excelled. He guided Daniel around obstacles with gentle pressure. He stopped instinctively at curbs. He learned when to block and when to lead. More importantly, he learned when to stay close, sensing the moments when Daniel's past crept too close to the surface. At night, Ranger slept beside the bed, one paw touching the frame, anchoring himself to Daniel's presence. The nightmares came less often now. When they did, Ranger was there before Daniel could call out. Weeks turned into months. The scarred building of Red Canyon remained closed, but something new had been born from its ashes. A partnership. On a mild autumn afternoon, Daniel and Ranger walked through the park together. Leaves crunched underfoot. Children laughed nearby. A breeze carried the scent of grass and distant rain. There was no leash. Daniel moved confidently, his hand resting lightly against Ranger's shoulder. Ranger stayed perfectly in step, guiding without restraint, correcting without command. Emma watched from a bench, a folder resting on her knees, a smile on her face she didn't try to hide. A woman passing by paused. "Beautiful dog," she said. Daniel smiled. "Thank you." Ranger glanced up briefly, then returned his focus forward. They reached the center of the park and stopped. Daniel tilted his head toward the sky. "I can't see it," he said softly. "But I know it's beautiful." Ranger pressed gently against him, steady and warm. Daniel rested his hand on Ranger's head. "So am I," he said. And for the first time since the war, he believed it. This story reminds us of something we often forget in everyday life. Not everything that looks broken is dangerous. Not everyone who has been pushed aside is lost. Sometimes the ones we label as too damaged are simply carrying pain we never stop to understand. And sometimes healing does not come from being fixed, but from being chosen. In our daily lives, we all meet people like Daniel and Ranger. People who move quietly through the world, unseen. People who have learned to survive without asking for help. If we slow down long enough to listen, we may discover that pain recognizes pain, and compassion can build bridges where fear once stood. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, and if you believe in second chances, type Amen in the comments. Do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach those who need them. May God bless you, protect you, and walk with you through every unseen battle. And may you never forget that even in darkness, you are not alone.